Well, hello there, Uncle Max. How are you this fine morning?
Oh, I'm all right now. I've woken up.
Well, that's marvellous. Now, I was thinking about when you were a lad, and it was the usual thing. Your schooling was usually done and dusted by about the age of 14. What went on?
Well, we just went through our grades right through and we went to the merit certificate, was at the state school, the highest. Well, we had a district inspector, school inspector, that come round and had a set exam. Depending on the marks you got, whether you had to resit the exam or if you were good enough, he'd just give you the certificate. Okay. And I was one of those lucky ones.
Oh, right.
I didn't have to actually sit for my certificate.
So, you know, the 3 R's, wasn't 3 R's, and there was actually a very high level of literacy back in those days.
Yes, it was. We used to get a school paper, and I think it was every 6 months it come out, or 3 months, and in that was set tests, reading, writing, mathematics, and that was a set test. And they were done and sent away to the Education Department in Melbourne. And that was virtually to keep a check on the efficiency of your school teachers.
Good. So you left school at 14 and
I did.
Your family was on a farm and so that was your lot to work on the farm. What sort of things did you do?
Oh, everything. Hand milking at that stage. 47, 48 cows, that's all we could milk on the farm.
That sounds like a fair few.
Well, you on your hand milking, there was a hell of a lot of bloody cows, I can tell you. But we had no electricity, and that came through the district in 1939. Dad built a new cow shed. It was 3 double bales and milking machines in it. First time.
You were born in about what,
28.
Yeah, righto. Okay, so you lived without electricity.
I was 15.
So, and you didn't have tractors either, did you?
No, horses, and that, we had our days with horses too, and quite a few funny things happened. But no, we had a lot of fun in lots of ways. Some of it was tough, but well, we had to work, we had to cut bracken, we had to cut blackberries, all by hand.
And you had to drain a swamp with your father, didn't you?
Yes, we had a swamp. I think there was, if I remember rightly, there was about 8 acres in the swamp. And it was sort of a saucer on the bottom end of it. When you got a lot of rain, the swamp overflowed and ran through. So Dad decided we'd dig a drain and into the swamp and drain it out. Well, the first drain we dug to, in the old measurements, round about 3 feet in depth, right up to the swamp. And I suppose it would be, in the old measurements, that it'd be at least 100 to 150 yards we had to dig. And then once we got into the swamp, because the water started to run out and we had to get out of the drain, and left it until that stopped running, just a trickle. Then we got back into the drain and dug it down a bit deeper. And this went on for quite a few years, and we really dug well down. I know it was well above my head anyway, the depth of the drain, and it drained it out pretty well.
Well, at least the ground would be soft.
Yeah, it was too. But we'd run into once we got into the swamp, because we had to dig up and continue the drain up into the swamp. We run into logs and God knows what there was buried in the swamp. So we had to chop sections of that out to continue the drain.
Chop them out with a handsaw and an axes and stuff.
Axes and a handsaw. Cut a strip about 3 feet out of it and carry on the drain.
That's a very serious sort of piece of work, that is.
I was fit those days.
What sort of mood were you in while you were doing that with your father, were you? Or you'd just go down and do a stretch
Oh,
yourself?
no, we both worked together, Dad and I, and he used to keep us going.
So the time we're talking about, that area, Mirboo, hadn't actually been settled for very long, had it? Because your grandfather was the first settler and then your father bought the farm from only one person who settled it before him.
That land was opened up in the late 1800s, where Dad and Grandfather settled or selected, and I think it was about 1891 or 92 when they selected that land. That's when that was opened up by the government.
And that's when your grandfather selected
Grandfather selected that, yeah.
it. And now part of the deal, he had to build a dwelling, so he had to learn. He wouldn't have known how to build a house because he was a blacksmith.
Well, he was a blacksmith. He had no idea about farming, which was a bit of a pity, but the rules were on that land when it was opened up. I couldn't stipulate what money they had to have, but it was a very low amount, and every year they had to do a certain amount of clearing of that land to carry on, but they had to clear land, build a hut or a dwelling, which was all palings or split timber, and out of the timber that they fell.
Well, now, apparently the bush you couldn't even ride a horse through. That's what he was dealing with.
Some of the places you couldn't, but other places you got through all right, but it was all scrub.
So he had to build a house. He would have had to fell trees, get out with an axe, and what? How would he have built a house? Slab huts?
They sawed these logs, they dropped these logs by axe and saw. Well, then they'd cut them into certain lengths that they wanted, and then they'd split the logs, and they had what they called a paling knife, or it was a blade with a handle in, and they'd knock it into one end of it, and the timber was that good and was straight grain, and you'd split off these palings. You could split them off at 1/2 inch or 3/4 of an inch in thickness, and that's what they built the houses with.
Gosh, well, he wouldn't have had anyone to help him except his kids, maybe.
Oh, yeah, well, there was only Dad and Grandfather on the farm at that stage. The rest of the family was still in Geelong, or Wonthaggi actually.
So your dad would have helped build that hut. And wattle and daub was another thing, what they'd sort of have woven walls.
Yeah, that was a woven hazelwood sticks they used to use a lot. They'd put stakes in the ground, and then they'd lace these long thin sticks between those stakes and mix up clay and straw and plaster the walls inside and outside, and then they'd whitewash out of lime and water the inside. It was posh.
Well, your dad must have been pretty with it. He would have known what's what and how to survive, wouldn't he?
Well, they had to, yeah, and everything the mall area and up through there, that was settled, well and truly settled. Well, then they used to have to come by horse and pack horse from Mirboo through to Mall, which, of course, on a horse that was near enough to a day's travel. Then they'd buy everything they wanted, their groceries and all the rest of it, load it onto the pack horses, and then come back home the next day with all that. And things weren't, you didn't jump into the motor car and take off.
What, they must have just slept under the wagon?
Oh, I don't know what they did. They probably slept in where they had their horses in the stalls and that in the town, because that was a big thing too of those days. They had these stables for people to stable their horses when they were in the town. They were looked after there. So things were a little bit different than they are today.
Huh. Now the fireplaces, they were big heavy things lined with clay too for those old slab huts.
They were all slabs of timber, and they'd plaster all the inside with clay, and because that was pretty thick when they put that in. But every so often, the clay would dry right out and crack, and the fire would get into the outside slabs. Then the rush was on. They get to work, and they were built in such a way that they weren't fully attached to the house. And they'd put stakes, usually Mum's clothes props from the clothesline, they'd grab them and use them as levers and lever the chimney away from the house. And they used to cause a lot of fun. I remember one of Dad's sisters, Auntie Sis, we were up there one Sunday and this is what happened. And one of her boys, he was watching it all go on, and as the chimney was levered off, when it hit the ground it collapsed, and it was just like a blowtorch. The fire flew out the end, and I don't know, I can't remember which one of the boys it was, but instead of running to the side, he ran straight up out from it, and he nearly took the hair off his head. He really increased his speed. That was quite a fun day, that.
Well, you'd know you were alive, wouldn't you?
Oh, too right we did.
And were those, I suppose you'd have to have a massive fireplace to make those places cosy, because...
Yeah, well, a lot of the fireplaces too, they had a little door each side, and they'd drag a log through, and as it burnt off, they'd pull a bit more in.
Oh.
Yeah, well, they were the real posh ones. Oh, they were an event in those days that you had to make everything you wanted, because you couldn't race down to the corner store or anything like that. But if anything broke, you had to mend it. The old number 8 fencing wire, which was commonly called the cocky silk, you mended everything with that. So coming very adaptive to making do.
Well, now, no electricity, you would have been pretty busy there, because that would have made every job harder. There was no mechanisation. I mean, I put my washing in the machine and pressed a button when I left home today.
Yeah.
But your mum, 8 kids, it would have been a whole day to wash everyone's clothes. Wouldn't be stirring over the cauldron of washing with a stick or something.
Well, how Mum did it, I don't know. She had to get into the cow shed and do help with the milking. She had 8 kids to get off to school, lunches to cut, and clothes to keep washed. The copper, everything was boiled in the copper, all washed by hand, wrung out by hand, hung up on the clothes lines by hand. And she ironed everything, sheets and all, and lightly starched the sheets as well. And God, the work she did, I don't know. And I know the shirts those days, the good shirts, had the detachable collars. And oh boy, Mum could starch things. And those collars were just like celluloid. And we hated the things because they had studs, one stud at the back and a stud in the front, that sort of held the shirt together instead of buttons. And they're all clipped on those things, and you go to the dance, whatever, it says the dance was over, the collars were off before you got home. You had a red ring roll right round your neck. Oh, they were pests of things. But Mum insisted, if we were going anywhere, she insisted we were dressed, and dressed properly. But things have totally changed, and as you say, there's no electricity. I just forget how long it was before Mum got a Kelvinator kerosene refrigerator, kerosene-operated refrigerator. And when the family grew up a bit and most of them got out working, they all clubbed together and bought Mum, that was the first one they bought. And instead of the cool guardy safe out on the veranda and the meat safe hanging up in the trees and the big trough in the laundry that pickled meat in it, and got this fridge. Oh boy, that was it. Well, then the next thing they bought Mum a washing machine, had a wringer and all on it, and that was a big of a thing too. It'd pinch your fingers if you didn't watch what you were doing. Oh, that was got after we got the electricity. But before the electricity, it was kerosene lamps. Then it became shellite lamps with pressurised. There was what they called a generator in it that had a little cup round it you filled with methylated spirits, lit that and heated all that up. So before you opened the valve up for the fuel to come through, you had to pump the thing up. If it wasn't quite hot enough, that generator, she used to flare right up. That used to cause a bit of fun. The lamps had what they call mantles on them, like little bags.
I know them.
When you first put them on, they were real, silky things, and you held a match under them and you burnt them out, and they shrunk down to nice little bags, and then that was all right. You light that up, and of course, moths and everything were attracted to the light, weren't they? And whoop, away'd go one of your mantles. And then it was on again. You had to shut it all down and start all over again. And, then they brought out lamps that had a little protector thing around, stop the moths getting in around the mantles. But we had a lot of fun.
So you were all beasts of burden, really, in those days, weren't you? Everyone, you were in there like with the draft horse and the bullock, weren't you? Everyone had to labour.
Yeah, well, that's all. There was no tractors about, of course. Well, there was a few. So there was one chap in Mirboo North, which was 10 mile away from where we were. He had a tractor. He used to do a lot of work round the district, ones that could scratch up a bit of money and get him out there to do it.
But when they put your road in there, Webb's Lane over at Mirboo North, they used a horse and plough and scoop, didn't they?
That's right. That's right. All the roads were built that way those days.
And they had a road gang. They stayed there in tents.
Yeah, they were halfway along the length of our lane. There was a flat area there. They had the tents set up there. And weekends, the other fellas most of them would take off home. There's one old bloke, he was a single fella, he used to stay there to feed the horse and look after them. Yeah, he was a lovely old bloke. He used to come up home quite often. And Mum used to bake our own bread and used to give him a half loaf twice a week, I think.
Well, the old baking the bread, that's a fair job too. And what about that time in the floods in the 30s and people ran out of yeast? They had to do aeroplane drops.
Well, that was the first time I ever saw an aeroplane. That was the old tiger moth. They'd come through the district and dropping off your mail and little packets of yeast for the bread making. And I can remember I was only a little brat and I used to have to run across the paddocks and pick these things up and find this little packet of yeast, which sometimes was quite hard to find in amongst the grass and whatnot. Yeah.
Gosh, that's
they were
amazing.
Funny days. Yeah.
So if you wanted bread, you had to bake it.
Oh, that's right. That's right. No bakers around in the district out there. And of course, a loaf of bread didn't last long with 8 kids in the house.
But your mum and dad, despite all the hard work, they were very light-hearted and you were a very happy family, weren't you?
Oh, yeah. Both Mum and Dad had a weird sense of humour, thankfully. That only lasted so certainly at the time, that sense of humour. When that run out, it was head for the hills. They were fair, but they were strict. But we had a happy life, yeah.
Well, then the war stepped in, didn't it? And that changed a lot of things, because I remember your sister, Auntie Florence, telling me that there were only 2 girls left in your district then, her, because she was looking after your sick mum, and another girl, and they had something called the Women's Land Army. What was going on then?
Well, there was none of the boys left on the farms, the 18-year-olds and that, they were all in the army, and they worked around the farms. They sort of took over the area, really.
The women?
The women did, yeah. Any man that was over 65, I think it was. Well, in my case, I was 17 when the war broke out, or 16, 17, and I couldn't, when I turned 18, I couldn't join the army because Dad was over that age and he had to stay there. We had to have the food and this grown and that for the army boys. I had to stay home on the farm. Because of that, some of the families, if the fathers weren't over that age, the women sort of, I don't know exactly how it worked, whether they had the choice of working for different people, and that was what kept the farms going.
Ah.
There's no labour about. That's how it all worked.
Yes, now, so, but you had a nice environment to work in. I was just thinking about, say, like you'd be spending a day working a draft horse, ploughing a paddock with the birds singing and the sun shining, and probably dream about a nice girl or something.
Oh, no, we never did that. we never thought of girls those days, much.
Talking about beasts of burden, what's the difference between using a bullock team and a draft horse? I mean, I would imagine that the bullocks would be pretty hard to train.
Well, the bullock operates totally different to a horse. A horse is inclined to rush into a job, where a bullock plods. He's slow. They had these yokes, which was a wooden frame that went across the back of their necks, and they had the iron loop that went round underneath from that. And that's the shoulders is what they used to pull with, and instead of sort of rushing into it, they'd lean to get things moving and then just plod along. But with the bullock team, you might, instead of, say, 4 or 5 horses, with the bullock team you'd have about twice that to get the same power once you got going. But because of the way a bullock worked compared to a horse, they had more pulling power because they didn't rush it.
I'm thinking about my cows now and harnessing up my brindle, for example, to a wagon full of cans of milk. I reckon it'd be a disaster. My cows are very single-minded, and they'd want me to go away and mind my own business. They wouldn't want to do what someone told them to do.
No, the bullocks they used, they were heavier than a cow. They were a different breed, really.
And quiet? They wanted to do what they were told?
Well, they were very quiet. They were picked by whoever had it and trained by whoever had it. There's a chap that had this bullock team at home, Andy Bassey. Oh, he was a hard man, tough. His bed, he slept with his animals, and his bed was a sheet of corrugated iron on the ground, covered with a sack bag, and a couple of bags to cover him as blankets. And that's the way he slept. And he was a cunning old sod, and they used to grow a lot of oats. And in the morning, he always managed to be camped overnight next to a patch of oats, young oats. And next morning you'd find him out there mending the fence up. So-and-so cattle had broken through the fence, and you could see where the wires had been cut. Everybody used to laugh about him. It didn't harm the oats, but he never ever touched them once they got over a certain height.
So what's your most outstanding sort of catastrophic or memorable event with a horse?
Well, the one I've never forgotten was you're talking about our lane, and I had to take the milk down. I think this was on another one you had told me about. And this horse we had, it was a stupid thing, and to excuse the expression, it used to piddle all the time I was working. We had to tie a sack bag round the back of it, and it used to keep flashing its tail. And because if you didn't have this bag round it, you smelled as bad as the horse did by the end of the day. But anyway, we had it was a trailer cum cart. It had a set of shafts you could put on it and slide the pole for the hitch for the car out of it. And this crazy horse we had was a flighty bloody thing. And I was carting the milk, I think it was 5 cans of milk down the road. So the milk cart had to pick him up. As we started down the lane, it was a little bit of a steepish bit at the top. The britchin broke, and the cart went forward, and as it went forward, the shafts went up in the air and the back of the trailer went down, and of course no tailboard in it, the cans all slide back.
Are you starting to freak?
I did start to fret, I'll tell you, and I had to spread my legs and drop the reins and grab the rails up on both sides of the trailer to try and hold the cans in. Well, there was two bends. It was like an S bend, and by the time we got to the first one, the horse was pretty well mobile, and we got round that one pretty well. The second one, the cart slid a little bit sideways. But the third one, it really whipped round, and I couldn't hold the cans. Down the bank I went, and all I could see were milk cans, lids, and milk all over the place. Put my hands over the back of my head and just buried my head in the dirt. Luckily I wasn't hit, but I was drowned, and I thought, oh, this is all right. The horse will stop down the track, on the track, because with a heavy gate down on the flat. That'll stop her. Didn't.
No.
She crashed right through it and left the car hanging on the gate, and she took off up the road. Well, I shot up to her about, it would be 3 or 4 kilometres up the road, where she'd stopped with another couple of horses in the paddock, and she was telling them all about what happened. And no, I've never ever forgotten that one. That was the closest call I've ever had.
Well, you couldn't have got into trouble for it because it's the horse,
No,
wasn't it?
I think I saved about a half of 1 can of milk out of the 5 cans. Yeah. But these things happen, and you've got to take them in your stride. You can't worry about them. But that was the nearest one I'd ever had, and I don't want another one.
No. So would you like to be living in a slab hut these days?
I don't think so. I don't think so.
No.
There's no such thing as electric blankets or those sort of things those days. We used to ride our push bikes to picture shows, dances, all that sort of thing. There's a place called Cairns Hill, rather steep. In those days it was only sand, gravel and 2-inch road metal. We used to run our chains off the bikes because they were all fixed wheel bikes, and away we'd go down this hill. And this one particular time, there was a cousin of ours, a very large, fat sort of a lad, and we went round these couple of corners, and halfway up that hill there was a water trough. It was for the horses in the older days when dragging wagons up the hill. And Ron lost his bike on the corner, and he and his bike parted, and he ended up sitting in this water trough. that was put the ice cream on the cake for our night. Yeah.
Oh, I like that.
There was some funny things happened. Brother Russell, he caught up to a chap by the name of Dick Walker. He had a Ford Ute. One place on coming down the hill, there was a creek run through under the road, and there was a culvert where it went under, and there was a fence virtually right up on the edge of the road on both sides, wire netting fences. Of course, no chains on the bike, no brakes on the bike. Russell couldn't slow down, and he caught up with old Dick on this corner, and as he passed Dick, his back of his left hand hit the mudguard on the ute. The right hand got scun on the wire netting fence. And I don't know who got the biggest fright out of those two, but it was a bit of hairy there for a while. Russ ended up going up the bank, and he fell back onto the road. So after that we thought, well, that was 2 incidents. It was time to leave the chains on the bikes and slow down a little bit. Yeah.
Now, what about riding to school on a pony in primary school and the horses didn't always do what you wanted them to do. In fact, they were quite pig-headed, weren't they?
Oh, only one of them. That's another story altogether. There was a little Shetland pony. He knew a lot more than we kids knew. He was temperamental. He said if you wanted to walk to school, he walked to school. No matter what you did, you couldn't get him out of a walk. If you wanted to canter, he'd canter. If you wanted to gallop, he'd gallop. And if you didn't want to go to school, get halfway down to school, he'd lay down. And if we persisted on sitting on him, he'd roll. But if you could find a puddle of water, that's where he laid down in the first place.
What, so you would have been rolled on in a puddle of water before you wised up, wouldn't you?
Oh, no, we made sure we saw what he was doing. We left him, but...
you were one step ahead.
Well, you had to be. He was a cunning little sod. So we gave that away and we walked to school. It was 2.5 miles. It was a lot easier and quicker than trying to catch them and things. But, we've had our fun. And as I say, quite often I'm here on my own and I sit and I think over the years, things were... Well, you took them in your stride. You had to. And we had a happy life and a good life. We always had 3 feeds a day, a dry and warm bed, and we were looked after. And you can't ask for any more than that.
Marvellous.
You can't ask for any more than that. We were lucky we picked the right parents.
That's good, Uncle Max.
We chose wisely.
Very good. Well, thank you very much, Uncle Max, and a bit of decent hard work hasn't done you any harm because you've hit 90, haven't you?
I have, yeah. Pleased to have done that too.
Yeah.
But I still get about, do what I want to do to a certain extent. But when I want to start to do something, I know I'm not as young as I was.
Never mind. Anyway, thank you very much.
Yeah. As I say,